Influenced by fans' desire for a crossover film depicting a fight between the two icons, New Line and Paramount tried to make a Freddy vs. Jason movie in 1987, but the two studios failed to agree on a story. When Jason Takes Manhattan failed to perform successfully at the box office, Sean Cunningham decided that he wanted to reacquire the rights to Friday the 13th and start working with New Line Cinema on Freddy vs. Jason, as New Line owned Nightmare on Elm Street. The concept of a fight between Freddy and Jason was not new. Paramount had approached New Line about filming a crossover years before the latter had gained the licensing rights to Friday the 13th. At that time, both companies wanted the license to the other's character so that they could control the making of the film. Negotiations on the project were never finalized, which led Paramount to make The New Blood. After Jason Takes Manhattan was released in 1989, the rights were sold to New Line before Cunningham could start working on Freddy vs. Jason. Wes Craven returned to New Line to make New Nightmare. This effectively put Freddy vs. Jason on hold, but allowed Cunningham the chance to bring Jason back into the spotlight with Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. The ninth installment turned a healthy profit, though was only intended to be a door for a crossover with Freddy. Cunningham's frustration with the delayed development of the Freddy vs. Jason project forced him to create another sequel in an effort to keep the series in the minds of audiences. Based on Jason Takes Manhattan's concept of taking Jason away from Crystal Lake, the 10th film would put Jason in space. The film suffered from the loss of its biggest supporter, president of production Michael DeLuca, when he resigned from his position. Lack of support forced the finished film to sit for 2 years before finally being released on April 26, 2002. It would go on to become the lowest grossing film in the series at the domestic box office. It also held the distinction of having the largest budget of any of the previous films at that time. 17 scripts were submitted, which eventually turned into one script. The producers decided for some time to go ahead with the script but changed their mind as they could not agree with the ideas proposed. Eventually, Damian Shannon and Mark Swift came in and created their own script, which the producers felt were much more closer to the Freddy and Jason backstories. Much of the earlier scripts dealt with cults that were attempting to resurrect Freddy and Jason to come back and fight. David S. Goyer did an uncredited rewrite of the script to make it shorter. One of his contributions to the script was the combination of the two characters of Gabe and Jenny. In one of the original endings, Freddy and Jason continue their battle in Hell when suddenly Pinhead, from Hellraiser, steps out of the shadows and separates them. He then asks calmly, "What seems to be the problem, gentlemen?" This was scrapped due to licensing issues. At one point, Peter Jackson was asked to direct. Rob Zombie was also offered to direct, but turned it down to work on his pet project, House of a Thousand Corpses. Stephen Norrington was also considered to direct the film. Hong Kong director Ronnie Yu would eventually sign on to direct Freddy vs. Jason. New Line believed Freddy vs. Jason needed a fresh start and chose a new actor for Jason. Cunningham disagreed with their decision, believing Kane Hodder was the best choice for the role. Hodder did receive the script for Freddy vs. Jason and had a meeting with director Ronnie Yu and New Line executives, but Matthew Barry and Yu felt the role should be recast to fit Yu's image of Jason. According to Hodder, New Line failed to provide him with a reason for the recasting, but Yu had explained he wanted a slower, more deliberate Jason, and less of the aggressive movements that Hodder had used in the previous films. Yu and development executive Jeff Katz recognized the outcry among fans over the replacement of Hodder as Jason, but stood by their choice in recasting. The role eventually went to Ken Kirzinger, a Canadian stuntman who worked on Jason Takes Manhattan. There are conflicting reports over the reason Kirzinger was cast. According to Yu, Kirzinger was hired because he was taller than Robert Englund, the actor who portrays Freddy Krueger. Kirzinger stands 6'5", compared to 6'3" from Kane Hodder. Yu wanted a much larger actor to tower over the 5'9" Englund. Kirzinger believes his experience on Part 8 helped him land the part, as Kirzinger doubled for Hodder on 2 scenes for the film, but also believes he was simply sized up and handed the job. Although he was hired by the crew, New Line did not officially cast Kirzinger until first seeing him on film. Kirzinger's first scene with Jason was walking down the street on Elm Street. New Line wanted a specific movement in Jason's walk. Kirzinger met their expectations and signed a contract with the studio. Even though Hodder expresses some resentment at not being chosen, he and Kirzinger are still good friends. According to Kane Hodder, C.J. Graham, who played Jason in Jason Lives, had the chance to reprise his role for this film after his agent suggested it to him. He declined the chance as he was good friends with Hodder and felt the film's producers were treating him unfairly by recasting the character. However, even Ken Kirzinger did not perform the role throughout the entire film. In the final scene, where Jason emerges from the water holding Freddy's head in his hand, the role was played by another actor, Douglas Tate. Almost a year after originally auditioning for You, Tate was called in for the reshoot of the climactic closing sequence. Robert Englund would return to play Freddy. This film marks Robert Englund's last official on-screen appearance as Freddy, though he would occasionally appear as a character at conventions and events. In 2014, Englund officially retired from the role after appearing in full costume and makeup at an event marketed as his final portrayal of the character. One of Robert Englund's stunt doubles was Oscar Gutierrez, better known by his wrestling name, Rey Mysterio Jr. Crystal Lowe was in the running for the role of Laurie, but the role would ultimately go to Monica Keena. Kelly Rowland would be cast as Kia. Brad Renfro was originally cast as Will, but showed up to the set so strung out that they had to recast a week prior to shooting. After Brad Renfro dropped out of the film, future The Vampire Diaries actor Ian Somerhalder was considered as a replacement, but director Ronnie Yu felt he was too pretty. Jason Ritter, who actually got the part, had initially tested but they hadn't felt he was right for the role, would get the role of Will. The role of Mark was originally written for a Latino actor, however the Latino actor who had been cast dropped out shortly before production began. Brendan Fletcher, who had already secured a small role in the film, was suggested as a possible replacement, and after a successful audition, the role was rewritten and Fletcher was cast. Zach Ward would be cast as Bobby Davis. Zach Ward and Brendan Fletcher were really good friends, and were happy to know that they were both cast as brothers in the film. Chris Marquette would be cast as Charlie Linderman. Lachlan Monroe would be cast as Deputy Scott Stubbs. Catherine Isabel was cast as Gib. Catherine Isabel was originally cast as Jenny, while Lauren Lee Smith was cast as Gib. In the rewrite process, Jenny was eliminated, and all of her lines were given to Gib. Eventually, Catherine Isabel took over the part of Gib, and Lauren Lee Smith was no longer in the film. Kyle Labine would be cast as Bill Freeberg. Tom Butler would be cast as Dr. Campbell. Gary Chalk would be cast as Sheriff Williams. Jesse Hutch would be cast as Trey. Odessa Monroe would be cast as Heather. Chris Gauthier would be cast as Shaq. Paula Shaw would be cast as Pamela Voorhees. Betsy Palmer, who played Jason's mother in the original Friday the 13th, was asked to reprise her role as Mrs. Voorhees, but turned it down because she felt the role was too small of a part for her. A then unknown Evangeline Lilly had a brief walk-on role as a high school student. New Line Cinema Studio chief Robert Shea, who served as producer on every preceding Nightmare on Elm Street film, appears as the school principal. When the original script proved to be too long, the characters of Tommy Jarvis and Kelly were eliminated. Jarvis was to have been played by Jason Bateman, and Jenny by Catherine Isabel. The producers felt Isabel had the makings of a scream queen with a horror-loaded resume, so her part was then switched with Lauren Lee Smith, so Catherine Isabel became Gib and Lauren Lee Smith became Jenny, who unfortunately was no longer in the script. The film's music would be scored by Graham Revell. According to Robert Englund, his Freddy makeup was so thick that he didn't really know how hot it was from the fires during the filming. When he got in to have his makeup removed, it had literally bonded itself to the In several early drafts of the script, two twists were considered that would have connected the past of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. One considered twist was that Freddy either raped or had a consensual sexual encounter with Jason's mother, and as a result had unknowingly fathered Jason. Another twist considered was that Freddy had worked at Camp Crystal Lake in the past, and had either molested Jason as a child, or was somehow connected to his drowning, being a child murderer and potential sexual offender, thus giving Jason a motivation to track down and kill Freddy. Both ideas were eventually dropped, as producers felt that they were too contrived and too dark for the film. The scene which featured Jason's bed kill was originally rejected by New Line Studio executives, but writers Mark Swift and Damian Shannon fought hard for filming it. They acted it out on the floor to convince director Ronnie Yu. After he liked the idea, the scene was filmed, and it turns out to be the biggest reaction of audience during the test screening. Catherine Isabel was quite upset with director Ronnie Yu when she learned that by accepting the role of Gib, something Yu suggested, she was expected to do a nude shower scene. She refused to do so, therefore Tammy Morris replaced her as a body double for the scene. There was great friction between Isabel and Yu for the rest of the shoot because of this incident. One early version of the script called for the beginning of the film to take place in medieval times, while another called for the beginning to start out at Camp Crystal Lake, with Jason getting arrested. Another script was to have the beginning of the film take place at the eve of the millennium. Also, the original concept started out as Michael Myers vs. Jason, which had been planned since the early 90s. However, that idea was dropped because Michael and Jason are too similar. It was decided that the film would be more interesting if the two killers were different. Another early considered script revolved around a cult of Freddy-worshipping teens called the Fredheads, who sought to resurrect Freddy through a series of sacrifices. Jason would be brought back to life through a sacrifice in order to stop Freddy and the cult. In another early draft of the script, Jason Voorhees had actually been captured and restrained by authorities and would spend much of the film on trial for his countless murders. His defense lawyer would have been the lead character. Some early scripts had Freddy pee in the Holy Grail, a boxing scene, and a hockey scene. Freddy gets beamed by a satellite ray into the sun. At one point, Freddy would to have collect 13 demons to collect his powers. Alice, Jacob, and Tommy were to be main characters. There was supposed to be a wall constructed around Crystal Lake to keep people out, and other drafts had the camp being torn down at the end. One unused script featured Jason driving a Subaru, Jason helping the main characters, the final fight between the two taking place in a burning mall, Freddy killing a girl by turning her into a giant lobster and Flash steaming her, Jason killing a man by shoving a shotgun up his rear, a Freddy-worshipping cult called the Fredheads, lizard people living in the dream world, Jason being brought back to life with the heart of the final girl's dead boyfriend, and Freddy summoning Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, and John Wayne Gacy to aid him in the fight against Jason. Several endings were considered for the film. Originally shot was a scene in which Laurie and Will begin to have sex for the first time. However, Will starts acting a little crazy and eventually sprouts a Freddy Krueger claw, then proceeds to slash at his girlfriend. This was cut due to miserable test scores in which the audience thought the acting was terrible and asked, does this mean Freddy won? Where's Jason? Is this a dream? Is Will turning evil and is now some sort of son of Freddy? Director Ronnie Yu originally turned down the directing job because the script didn't indicate who won at the end. He agreed to take the job when Robert Shea told him he could make that decision himself. Ronnie Yu then came up with the idea of Jason to hold Freddy's head at the end. Robert Shea agreed, but wanted Freddy to wink at the audience. According to writer Mark Swift, the ending delivered the effect that he originally was going for. He personally thinks Jason won the war. At one point in time, a sequel titled Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash was considered, which would have included Bruce Campbell's iconic cult character Ash from the Evil Dead trilogy. For a number of reasons, including legality issues over New Line not owning Evil Dead or the rights to the character Ash, and the decision to remake both Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, the film never came to be, although it was eventually turned into a popular comic book. New Line's advertising budget for Freddy vs. Jason surpassed the marketing campaigns for all 10 prior Friday the 13th films combined. Freddy vs. Jason was filmed in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This was the first Freddy movie not filmed in the United States, and the filmmakers had to search for a new house that would resemble the famous Freddy Krueger Elm Street house from the first 7 Nightmare films. The lake at Camp Crystal Lake was also being used to film the final scenes for X-Men 2. At the same time Freddy vs. Jason was being filmed, the two film casts even stayed at the same hotel. Freddy vs. Jason was released on August 15, 2003. It grossed $114 million, making it the highest grossing film in the Friday the 13th series, and the second highest grossing film in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 41% based on 153 reviews, and an average rating of 4.8 out of 10. On Metacritic, which assigns a normalized rating to reviews from mainstream critics, the film has an average score of 37 out of 100 based on 29 reviews, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Freddy vs. Jason was nominated for many awards in 2004, including a Fangoria Chainsaw Award for Best Makeup Creature Effects, which was won by Bill Terezakis. The film was made into a big haunted house at Universal's Halloween Horror Nights in 2015 in Orlando, Florida for the event's 25th anniversary. Freddy vs. Jason was released on VHS and DVD on January 13, 2004, and released on Blu-ray on September 8, 2009. And it is featured in the book Crystal Lake Memories, released in November 2005, and in the DVD and Blu-ray version of the book, released on September 13, 2013, as well as on the box set released on September 13, 2013 as well. I hope you've enjoyed this brief look at Freddy vs. Jason. Join me next time as we take a brief look at the remake of Friday the 13th.